Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rekstead and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. In today's episode, sponsored by Kingswaysoft, I talk about Dynamics portals and leveraging SharePoint document libraries via the portal. Kingswaysoft is a leading integration solution provider, offering software solutions that make data integration affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 80 countries and regions rely on Kingswaysoft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. And Kingswaysoft now works with CDS and Power Apps. Kingswaysoft is a leading provider of Microsoft Dynamics integration software, including Dynamics 365, CRM, AX, NAV, GP, SL, as well as many other applications. We thank Kingswaysoft for their sponsorship, and now, on with the show. And we're back with another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta. How are you? I said, hi, Britta. How are you? Ah, that's right. You're not here. Not for this episode. Dang. I was so looking forward to it. Do you know why? That's right. It's another listener question. I love getting them too. We'll see how long I can keep up trying to pretend that you're here opposite the microphone from me. But this question comes from listener Camille, who wants to talk about SharePoint permissions and the Dynamics portal. And the question is around if with the version 9 support for SharePoint integration to the Dynamics portal, how all the permissions are handled around the SharePoint document library. Is that all set up for the potential portal users and to be able to have access to the documents? Is it anonymous or something? How does that actually work? There's some documentation that she referenced here, which I'll comment on in the response about prerequisites and how that works, but there's not a clear answer around exactly kind of how is that working, or what's the mechanism there? What are some of those considerations? So I think this is a fantastic question, and it's in fact one where I didn't have an off the top of the head answer. This is one of those areas where the platform has been seeing these rapid releases. We're now into release waves twice a year where we get this almost constant stream of incremental capability. And before diving into a concrete answer, I always like to just do a little double checking, a little fact checking before doing this. And in fact, with this one, my go-to assumption would have been wrong, or at least, if not wrong, incomplete as to how some of it works. So as far as formulating an answer, since Britta is not here, I think I'll go through a few different questions and answers on this. The first one being, why would you want to enable this, or kind of what's a use case for why someone would want to do this? And then where does this question come from, kind of the question behind the question, as someone who, like Camille, knows the background of the Dynamics platform quite well. Another question is around the required prerequisites to even consider doing this within an environment. Another question is, what is the specific answer to the permissions question that she brought up? And if we have time at the end, I'll go through some of the advantages, drawbacks, alternatives, and so forth. So with the first question of why would you want to enable this, there could be quite a few different use cases, but if you think about it, you have a person who's going to be logging into your portal, so who that is, and they're validating against a contact record that you have inside of your Dynamics instance. So from there, when you consider them logging in and say looking at a case that they've submitted or some sort of record that sits in Dynamics that they've worked with, there may be more communication about that than just kind of text-based fields or that kind of thing. So, you may want to enable a document library to be able to store documents. The out-of-the-box behavior for Dynamics attachments and portals, at least at the time of this recording, is to store them in the actual Dynamics database. And if you consider that on any kind of large scale, it doesn't scale well. A database is not the right repository to hold, kind of attachments or documents in that way, even if they're associated to a record like a case. And I will use a case associated with a contact in the documents as my reference point as I go through this. So, if the out of the box default behavior of the portal is to attach to the database, we need to find some sort of alternative. But, what was really nice about that is it's kind of all the permissions are handled there because it is specifically associated to that case record. Enter in the SharePoint document library integration. So if we enable SharePoint document libraries and light those up for the case entity, all of a sudden we have this easy connection point between a specific case and the specific documents that are going to be associated with the with that case record, but they're going to be stored in a document library rather than in the Dynamics database itself. This is great from both a storage capacity standpoint, and it's really the better tool for the job than storing it directly in Dynamics. If you think of the document library, sharing it internally, you have other perhaps Office 365 users. They're not a Dynamics 365 user or a Power Apps user, and you can have these documents sit in a document library. You can control permissions. So, hey, someone else on the team can work on that document collaboratively with you, which is great if everyone is logged in and into your Office 365 instance. And, what kind of falls down with that is, well, what happens if you look outside of your organization, which is a common scenario for a portal. So from a portal perspective, if you don't have some other kind of automation to give those permissions to somebody, you'd end up having to manage permissions in two places, like have them try to log into your SharePoint site and get to that document library as a guest. It just gets a little bit messy in trying to manage those permissions, especially if you consider that you already have the case record that the contact is trying to get to, and you just want to have things specifically associated to that case, not have them try to wean or find their way through all of the different document libraries that you're associated with different cases that they've worked with before. So, this is really why you would want to enable this, is you want to have something to help kind of make that easier. But the core of the question there is, what do you need from a permission standpoint? Like, is all of it handled, or is only some of it handled? Is there still like a registration that user may have to do, or when they actually access the document, is there anything that they might have to consider as a portal user trying to get to that document? And this comes from I think anyway, I'm projecting this, but in previous scenarios that I've seen in trying to do this same thing, there is either a manual step or using some sort of plugin or custom code to help manage these permissions between the case association to a document library and then specific users and user access to that. Kind of between SharePoint and then the people associated with that case record in Dynamics 365. So from there, let's consider what is kind of some of the prerequisite to be able to use this feature, this functionality that we have. And this is really well laid out in the documentation for setting up portals associated with Dynamics 365 or with the Common Data Service in general. And there's a video on kind of setting up the core document library server to server or server side or server based authentication between Dynamics 365 and SharePoint Online. That video is very straightforward, just a couple minutes long, and then from there you would have enable the specific entities that you want dynamic or document libraries to be associated with. You need to make sure that the form that's associated with the case record in this example has the document library on there as a subgrid. So, and you'll most likely want to have that in both the standard end user form for somebody inside of Dynamics, as well as the web portal form that somebody's going to use if they're logged in and going through the portal to review that case. That way you can kind of get to it on both sides, and you're not forcing your internal folks to have to go to the portal, and then for the folks who only go to the portal, they would have a means to see that. Now, when setting both of these up, a couple of things that are just kind of a general best practice is when enabling the document library on a per entity basis, you'll want to make sure to cull through the list. There are a handful of these that are selected by default. Good practice is to go through and wean out the ones that just don't fit for whatever use case you're using. It's easy enough to add those later, and it's not problematic to be able to add those later. But why kind of set that up and put it in place if there's not actually a business driver for using it? Just more overhead or something someone might have to sift through later if somebody decided, hey, I'll associate a document library here with my opportunity record or whatever that other record type might be. You don't need some of those, so go ahead and trim those out. The other one is if you're doing any kind of custom configuration of the portal using a special form for the case record. Now, the documentation that's out there is great if you just kind of have vanilla out of the box. In the instance that I tested this in, I had several different web forms for being represented in the portal for different types of users. So I just went through, and the directions didn't quite line up because mine was configured with a more advanced configuration from some of the previous work I'd done. So not huge stuff, but just worth keeping in mind if you already have a portal in place and have done any kind of that configuration beyond what the vanilla out of the box is. So the answer to the permissions question, we get the data point from a couple of different spots here. One of them is, once you have those document libraries set up and working between Dynamics and SharePoint, there's the incremental step of saying, okay, now we want to enable SharePoint document libraries through the portal as well. That's done through portal configuration. You need to be a portal administrator to be able to do that. And in fact, you need someone with even more administrator permissions to be able to enable this. And the reason why is you are going to accept on behalf of the organization the application of the portal via Dynamics 365 and the associations that you're making between those records to be able to give access to that logged in portal user via that connection that you're setting up and you're enabling there. And that's going to be done kind of on the backside. It's a server to server connection there. So this is actually what keeps you from having to log in with separate credentials or do something like that. Everything is managed at the portal user side through your portal login. That kind of handles everything, which means you're putting the work onto the back-end, Dynamics server that's helping facilitate that traffic. And in accepting the permissions that are requested when you set that up, you are granting that access to be able to happen. It's always going to be using the context of the specific case that you're looking at. So it's not opening something wide open to be able to look at it, but there is that which is being managed on behalf of a person having to go in and manually create those kinds of associations to get to the document. So, it was from an ease of use, ease of implementation standpoint, this is a fantastic spot for us to be in, because you don't have to go in and try to manage those types of permissions in two places. It's all going to be taken care of for you by enabling that both of those features. So between Dynamics and SharePoint, and then between the portal and Dynamics. So boom, bam, all that magic does the work for you. So if I step through this with a little bit of an example. So if I step through an example of this, in case a little bit different of a mental picture would help you with that. Imagine George. George is an external person who can log into your Dynamics portal. And in that portal, they have logged a case. And there is some documentation that has been associated with that case. Maybe they uploaded a picture, and then a support person has brought in a document or some sort of file for them to be able to gain access to. These are being stored technically inside of a SharePoint document library, but to the user, the agent on the Dynamics 365 side, they're looking at a case record and they're associating documents through there. From George's point of view, George logs into the portal and goes to that case and sees the associated documents there. So not really having to think about or consider any of the mechanics of where this information is being stored. It's just, all automatically there for him. And of course, there's the guts of this work and the server-to-server communication that makes it happen. But he's just happy as a clam because George has this item that he raised, gave some information, received some information back, and couldn't be happier. All of it done through a secure portal. So from there, I do want to make a couple of other comments around this because because it is using SharePoint, there could be some assumptions around certain functionality or capability that you're getting there. And I just want to be clear in calling a couple of these out, just not to mislead anybody, or it's not a surprise when you get there. And hopefully it's not that much of a surprise given the nature of what's going on here. But using that example with George, if George is looking at let's say it's a Word document that's been updated. You think of a Word document inside of a SharePoint document library, and there's a lot of feature capability in SharePoint of being able to collaborate on that document, perhaps co-author, look at, checkout, check-in, and versioning and history and all of those types of things that we get with SharePoint Online. If we're using kind of that portal front end to upload a document, it may be going into SharePoint Online on the back end. That's the landing place for it. But for George and his access to that, he's not going to have that same type of rich experience. So, if the use case would be something that would require like a co-authoring or something of that nature, this approach really isn't going to replicate that. It's going to be kind of an upload and a download of those documents that's there. From an alternative perspective there, that could be one where maybe you do want to manage something for George, like logging into a SharePoint site, or perhaps using Teams, create a team in Teams for George to be able to use or specific for this case. You can have him come in as a guest user and only have access to that team or those teams that he's been associated with in your tenant. There, you can have your document that would be reviewed, co-authored, and you get all the feature capability of using Teams and that modern collaboration in that way. But the drawback there is it's not quite the same ease of use of being able to get to that document. It is, from George's perspective, a separate application. Depending on what the business case is, what the use case is, what the user experience needs to be, both of those can be totally valid, and there's good reason for needing to track back to that individual, or log in through Teams versus through a portal or that kind of thing. But did definitely want to call that out, as even though SharePoint is being used, it's not necessarily the SharePoint experience that some might expect if they hear that. So definitely want to say thank you to Camille for bringing in this question, giving me an opportunity to roll up my sleeves a bit and make sure that I'm getting good, clean, definitive answers as I work with the platform as we get new feature functionality, new capabilities, and just kind of getting to see some of this stuff in action. So appreciate that opportunity. Britta, for you, I really look forward to having you back, because I don't like talking one-directionally this much. It is definitely different there, so looking forward to having you back on the next one. And without further ado, I will sign off for this one and chat with you next time. You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. If you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show, reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter too. Britta is @MacGyverCRM, and I'm @MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.